We want to turn back to that horrifying attack on a maternity hospital in Ukraine. It underscores how children and families are facing some of the most dire consequences of war. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky tweeted earlier saying, quote, children are under the wreckage. Atrocity. How much longer will the world be an accomplice ignoring terror? For more on this, I want to bring in Michael Nyenhuis. He is the president and CEO of UNICEF USA. Michael, welcome. Thanks very much for being with us. So your organization is condemning the attack on the maternity hospital. Are you hearing anything more from your teams in Ukraine about this? And what is UNICEF calling for now?
Well, it's just one more step in the trauma that children and families are facing, both in Ukraine and those who are leaving the country into neighboring countries. This war in Ukraine is has so many facets to it, but the effect on children can't be overstated. They are, imagine being a child there a few weeks ago. You were living your normal life in your normal home, going to school, and now you're either a refugee or you're huddled somewhere for safety. And we just know already the number of deaths are way too high, but we're also deeply concerned about the long-term trauma that this is going to be on children.
I want to ask you more about that in just a moment. But, as we watch this footage come in from Ukraine, you can see that these front lines are constantly changing on the battlefield. What is UNICEF doing with those kinds of difficulties to try and provide those basic supplies to children and families in Ukraine? And how has experience in other areas of the world that have also seen conflict sort of helped prepare for this difficult moment?
Well, we're prepared in a number of ways. One of them is that we have been in Ukraine for 25 years working there. So we know the country, we've got good partnerships there. We know the terrain, we know the hospitals, the schools, all of that. So our staff on the ground, 140 strong there, have been very active before the conflict began and since the war has been raging. Obviously their safety is a prime concern for us, and so we're careful with them, but they're providing terrific service wherever they go. But UNICEF is set up for this. We're on the ground in 180 countries. We are active in all of the major conflicts zones that you would find in the world, in Syria and Yemen and other places like that. So we know what to do. We've been successful at bringing critical medical relief supplies into the country already in a big convoy that we sent in, providing critical supplies to hospitals in Kyiv and Kharkiv, as well as setting up centers along the border to deal with the refugees who are crossing.
You mentioned the trauma. We saw a little of that in Charlie D'Agata's piece earlier, the physical and mental toll this war is taking on Ukrainian children. What is UNICEF seeing now in children because of this particular conflict, and how are workers trying to address that?
Yeah, we take mental health and psychosocial support very seriously in these settings, and we have trained professional teams that deal directly with children and their parents on these issues. And we've been active with mobile teams within Ukraine to provide that kind of trauma care to children, and as well in the centers that we've set up in other countries across the border where refugees are coming to deal with that trauma as well. Listen, kids are the ones in some sense who are impacted the most because their entire futures are at stake here. Not only the traumas of hearing bombs and shells go on above your head, or fleeing your home and leaving your father behind and crossing into another country, but they're out of school once again. We saw the effects of kids being out of school during the COVID pandemic, and we know how important it is to their stability to have a stable life and to be in school and to be in their homes and to be in their neighborhoods. And that trauma is going to take a long, long time to deal with.
Yeah, and you mentioned UNICEF operates in some 180 countries around the world, and we do know that millions of children in places like Yemen and South Sudan have also been impacted by war as well as famine. We often hear, Michael, that kids are resilient, but what are the long-term impacts of conflict on children?
Well, the long-term impacts are huge. I mean, imagine losing, a year or two or more of school and what that does to set back children. Imagine how many children just fall out of school entirely. We have statistics through the COVID pandemic of kids in many developing countries that, maybe 10, 11 million girls, for instance, will never go back to school because they were kept out of it from the pandemic. And that happens in conflict settings too. People lose their routine, they lose their progress, they lose their motivation. So it's really important that we surround these children with care, both the health care they need, the mental health care that they need, to try to get things back to normal for them in some way.
Right. It's so critical because when you speak to people who have escaped conflict, you can hear years later how haunted they still can be from what it is that they've witnessed. Michael Nyenhuis, thank you very much for joining us. We really appreciate your time.
Thanks for your concern.